The kind of people who are going to a Trump rally amidst a pandemic, people who are going to travel from all over the country, camp out in line, those people are going to be, by definition, the hardest of hardcore supporters. Their relationship to Trump and Trumpism is more than just the person they vote for, the politics they have. It is something far, far deeper. In many cases, more bizarre. This new profile for Vanity Fair writer Jeff Sharlet argues that Trump rallies have essentially become a kind of religious experience, detached from mundane arguments or even reason. Quote, the joy of a Trump rally is not partisan. It's the ecstasy of liberation. It's the convert's conviction. They have transcended compromise and coalition. They have entered into the light undiluted and pure. And joining me now is Jeff Sharlet, a Vanity Fair contributor who spent much of his career reporting on the intersection of religion and politics. And two of his books on this topic have become the basis of a Netflix documentary series called The Family. Jeff, I've been a fan of your writing for a very long time and was very excited to see your byline in this piece. And the piece did not disappoint. And I thought the sort of religious framework you bring to it was really illuminating. What did you feel like you were discovering as you were spending time in this milieu?
Something's changed in the years of Trump's presidency. In 2016, I was looking at the religion and the rallies, and I found something, a prosperity gospel, kind of a get-rich-quick promise. Now it's much darker, and I liken it to something called the Gnostic gospel, this idea that all knowledge is hidden, that elites are in this sort of vast conspiracy against us, and that only the great man himself, Trump, and by pushing aside expert knowledge, can we get to the truth and really ferret out our enemies and destroy them. It's about destroying an enemy within now.
Yeah, and it's also about the falsity of the world that you see before you, which I think relates to the kind of QAnon conspiracy theory that there's the famous Trump line about like, don't everything you're seeing and reading isn't true, right? That like when the people that I hire come out and say that I'm exactly the crude, incompetent brute that I look like they're lying. But there has to be this sort of willed religious feeling to constantly be seeing the actual world, getting information and discounting that as like a false consciousness.
A false consciousness, or rather you learn how to read what the actual evidence is. And for instance, many of the folks I met at these rallies, whether they were invested in QAnon or had never heard of it, I kept coming across this idea that in Trump's tweets, some of them wear T-shirts that say Trump's tweets matter. In Trump's tweets, every typo, every misspelling, especially the strange capitalizations are actually messages, and that you have to study them like scripture, one pastor told me, to understand the real meaning beneath the veneer of the bumbling buffoon.
There's also the fact that these have aged, right? And you talk about it taking on a darker cast where it's like a Grateful Dead show or a Fish show. There's a subculture, there's institutions, there's a universe that's grown up around this as a genre of event that I don't think necessarily was quite there in 15 and 16. Now it's a thing, it's a happening.
It's a thing. I mean, there's people who go in this story. There's people who've been to dozens of rallies. There was one guy who's called the Trumped Up Cowboy, and he pays for a group of teenagers. He says he found them in the woods of Kentucky, which sounds a little strange, and flies them around the country. And they go to rallies all over the country to sort of spread the word. Brad Parscale from The Stage, Trump's campaign manager, even sort of name checked these guys. Some people have gone to dozens, 68 rallies one person had. They get campers and they travel around the country. So they have that Grateful Dead connection, that Fish connection, that kind of absolute devotion. And what's interesting is it doesn't really matter what happens at the rally. At one I went to in Sunrise, Florida, Trump's must have spoken for, it seemed like 2 hours. A lot of people left early. And so I would speak to them and I say, are you disappointed? They said, no, this was wonderful. And I said, but you're leaving early. And I said, it was great. And it didn't even matter what was said. It was the ritual.
Right. Why? What do you think? I mean, obviously, we've seen interviews with people who are going to these rallies saying, look, if Trump says it's safe, it's safe. I saw someone today say, if I die, I have to die, that they're sort of willing to take the risk. And I get it. I mean, I don't want to be too blinkered here. There's lots of people who are in the streets protesting for a cause they thought mattered a lot and knew that might be taking some risk on. So people make those sort of balanced judgments. But I'm curious what you make of people showing up to go to an indoor unmasked rally in the middle of the pandemic.
I think it's a very different experience than what we see with folks protesting. Oftentimes, we should say, taking precautions as they do so. But this is an idea that you are protected by the hand of God. I mean, that we all heard that joke when Trump jokingly referred to himself as the chosen one. But when you go to the rallies and you talk to people, you find that idea of divinity played out over and over again, that God, he really is God's chosen one. And that means that the rally itself has this sort of spiritual protection. The coronavirus, whether you believe in it as a conspiracy or you think it's a real problem, it's not going to touch you at the rally. You're going to be sort of magically protected.
How representative, the big question that hangs over American politics, right, is we know there are these people, right? There's some tiny subset of people. There's a person who goes 68 times. There's, you go out in concentric circles. There are people that go to one rally, and there are people who would like put up a window sign or wear a MAGA hat, and then there's people that would vote for Donald Trump. Like, what is your understanding of the size of this world?
I think that's one of the really key things. When you go to the rallies, most of the press, as you know, stays in a press cage. And I think there needs to be kind of more of an engagement with people. And we need to look at these rallies not so much as political events, but as religious rituals. And then you discover that although the sort of the QAnon believers, that's a small subset, those ideas have sort of infiltrated the much broader movement. I mean, Trump checks them from the stage, talking about things that he can't tell you, talking about invisible enemies. A real moment for me, I was talking to one woman, and she was deeply invested in QAnon. And like a surprising number of people, she believed that not only are the Democrats elite, invested in child trafficking, they're actually invested in cannibalism. So I turned to the people around me who were not, they had gone to that one rally. They weren't people who are on the Trump trail. And I said, do you believe this? And some said, well, it's hard to say. I don't know. No one was saying, that's crazy. That's insane. It was all within the realm of possibility once you had abandoned that. And then Trump comes on stage and he starts talking about horrible, horrible stories. I mean, really gory violence. He spins out for a long time and he says, there's more I can't tell you. And that they experience as confirmation of their beliefs.
Right. It's an incredible piece of work, Jeff Sharlet. It's in Vanity Fair. You should definitely check it out. Thank you so much for making some time with us tonight.